You're with the Deep Dive, and we're here to give you exactly that, a really focused look at the information that truly matters right now.
That's the goal.
So today, we're tackling the big picture,
Yeah.
these interconnected global events really shaping things.
Absolutely. From Ukraine to the Middle East, economic shifts. It's all linked.
Exactly. You've shared a ton of sources, news reports, expert commentary, and our mission, really, is to pull out the key takeaways, the so what of it all for you.
I want to connect those dots for you. Military, diplomacy, economics. See how they influence each other.
Right, and hopefully uncover some maybe surprising details along the way without it being overwhelming. Make sense of this significance.
Precisely. And what strikes you immediately, looking at all this, is just how interdependent everything is. Ukraine doesn't happen in isolation.
No, it clearly impacts stability elsewhere, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Middle East, economic policies.
Yeah. And national strategies globally. Our aim is to make those connections really clear.
Okay, great. Let's dive straight into Ukraine then. It's still very much front and center.
Understandably so.
The reports you sent detail some really intense recent Russian attacks. Kharkiv specifically, on Good Friday.
Yes, that was a heavy barrage. Ballistic missiles, which are incredibly fast. Cruise missiles.
The guided ones.
Right, and the Shahed drones as well. A real mix.
And tragically, the reports mention one death, but 82 people injured, just in that single attack.
It's this escalation against civilian areas that's deeply concerning. The mix of weapons is notable, too.
How so?
Well, ballistics give you speed and impact. Cruise missiles offer accuracy, and the drones. They're a persistent, sort of lower-cost threat. They can try to overwhelm defenses.
And the timing. President Zelensky pointed that out, didn't he? Good Friday.
He did. Adds a very somber dimension, obviously.
His response was quick, wasn't it? On social media, saying Russia started this sacred day attacking civilians.
Yeah, and the videos that came out afterwards. Rescue workers, the damaged buildings. They really bring home the human cost.
There was also that incredibly moving account from a Kharkiv resident.
The one who lost her husband?
Yes. Describing the explosions, windows shattering, just terrifying.
Those personal stories are so important. They ground the numbers, remind us what this actually means for people.
And the mayor of Kharkiv reported, 15 residential buildings destroyed?
That's right, 15. It shows the scale of it, the ongoing danger.
And Kharkiv wasn't alone. Sumy, also in the northeast, got hit. A drone attack on a bakery, of all places.
Yes, and that prompted some sharp criticism from Andrei Sybiha.
Right. He questioned Putin's talk about Christian values, given an attack like that on Good Friday.
It really highlights the constant battle over the narrative, doesn't it? Both sides trying to frame the other's actions negatively.
Trying to sway opinion, domestically and internationally.
Exactly. Sybiha's comment directly challenges those moral justifications you sometimes hear.
Okay, let's shift gears slightly. Still on Ukraine, though. The Guardian had a piece about a potential U.S. Ukraine deal involving strategic minerals.
Ah, yes, and a joint investment fund. That could have some pretty significant long-term implications.
Strategic minerals. Things like lithium, cobalt. Essential for tech and defense.
Precisely. This could position Ukraine as a key supplier down the road, change its economic, maybe even strategic weight.
And the investment fund would provide the capital, presumably?
That seems to be the idea. But there's a bit of ambiguity, isn't there, about the profits?
Yeah, will they be used to offset U.S. military aid? That's the big question.
It raises questions about the nature of the deal. Is it purely investment? Or is there an element of, repayment expected for all the aid?
Which neatly brings us to that clash in perspectives between Trump and Zelensky on the aid itself.
Right. A pretty stark difference.
Trump reportedly saying Ukraine owes the U.S., $300 billion?
While Zelensky insists it was a donation support between allies.
That's a fundamental disagreement. It could really complicate future talks about aid, couldn't it?
Absolutely. Trump's view is more transactional, you could say. Zelensky's framing is about alliance, mutual support against aggression. Very different starting points.
And speaking of future talks, the sources suggest Trump's pushing for a ceasefire.
He is, but there seems to be some disagreement within the U.S. on how to proceed.
Yeah, Marco Rubio sounded quite cautious, saying the U.S. might pull back from peace efforts if there's no quick progress.
Whereas Vice President J.D. Vance, after his Italy trip, sounded more optimistic about finding a path to peace.
Quite a contrast there.
It really underscores the complexities, the competing priorities within the U.S. political scene regarding Ukraine. Rubio seems urgent, maybe a bit skeptical.
And Vance, More hopeful.
Perhaps. Or maybe just believes diplomatic channels aren't exhausted yet. Different assessments.
Rubio also brought up Europe's role, which is critical.
Especially regarding sanctions, yeah.
He mentioned that the hefty European sanctions on Russia would likely need lifting for any truce to stick.
That adds a whole other layer of diplomatic complexity, doesn't it? Lifting those would be a huge concession from Europe.
Requires careful deliberation, coordination.
And likely reciprocal steps from Russia. It really needs a unified international front.
Then there's the issue of U.S. security guarantees for Ukraine. Discussed in Paris, apparently.
Rubio called that part solvable, but warned of bigger challenges remaining.
So the guarantees themselves might be doable, but the wider geopolitical picture.
Exactly. Finding a formula that reassures Ukraine, but also addresses Russia's concerns, particularly about NATO, that's the tough part.
Rubio seemed to put a tight timeline on it, in a matter of days, to see if a short-term peace deal is feasible.
Yes, suggesting that if not, the U.S. might, quote, move on.
That feels like a potentially significant shift in U.S. strategy.
It could be. A pivot away from leading peace talks if a breakthrough doesn't look imminent. That would have major implications.
And one last worrying point on Ukraine. That informal understanding about not hitting power plants seems to be expiring.
Yeah, it was never fully solid, but now it seems both Russia and Ukraine might resume targeting that critical infrastructure.
Which has devastating consequences for civilians, obviously. Heating, water, hospitals.
Indeed. It signals a potential further intensification, more risk for vulnerable people on both sides. A grim outlook there.
Okay, let's turn our attention now. Middle East. Always complex.
Perpetually, yes.
Sources detail a U.S. attack in Yemen, port of Ras Issa, targeting the Houthis.
Yes, and the reported casualties are disturbingly high. The Yemeni health ministry says 74 dead, 171 injured.
Making it the deadliest strike since this U.S. campaign started last month, that's a real escalation.
It marks a definite increase in intensity. And those high numbers raise serious questions about, well, proportionality and precision.
And the potential for fueling more instability. We should remember the context here.
Right. The Houthis control a large part of Yemen, and they've been attacking Red Sea shipping, saying it's in support of Palestinians in Gaza.
The stated U.S. reason for this specific attack, disrupting the Houthis' fuel supply. The port has oil storage.
A strategic objective, certainly. Cutting fuel could hamper their operations.
But the human cost is immense, leading to, understandably, a lot of criticism.
It highlights that core dilemma in military action. Balancing strategic aims with minimizing civilian harm. It could also worsen anti-American sentiment and the humanitarian crisis there.
Okay, moving from Yemen to another major tension point. U.S.-Iran relations, specifically the nuclear program.
Ah, yes, the secret negotiations.
Reports say they're ongoing. First round in Oman, second plan for Rome, and described as positive so far.
Which is interesting given the often confrontational public rhetoric, isn't it?
Very. It suggests secret channels might be making more progress.
Often the case. It indicates both sides might see a need to manage the issue, prevent things escalating further in the region.
So what's Iran's position, according to these reports?
They're apparently willing to limit enriched uranium, but they want firm guarantees that the U.S. won't pull out of the deal again like Trump did in 2018. That's crucial for them.
But they're not willing to dismantle centrifuges or stop enrichment completely.
No, and reportedly no changes to their missile program either. Those seem to be their red lines. They see that infrastructure and capability as vital for security.
The demand for guarantees shows deep mistrust, doesn't it?
Understandably so, given past experience.
Meanwhile, the lead U.S. negotiator, Steve Witkoff, took a hard line publicly on X,
saying Iran must stop and eliminate its enrichment for any deal. Yes.
Doesn't sound much like compromise is imminent. Based on that?
Well, that public stance versus private talks, it's a common diplomatic tactic, right? Signaling resolve, maybe playing to domestic audiences.
But the secret talks continue.
Suggesting the administration knows a more nuanced approach might be needed for actual progress. Finding some middle ground on proliferation risks, probably.
Yeah, this next bit is quite something. The New York Times reported Israel was ready to attack Iranian nuclear sites back in May.
Yes, a potential attack apparently prepared.
But halted because Trump didn't give approval. That's striking.
Yeah.
Potential near miss.
It really is. It shows that even with strong U.S.-Israel alignment on the threat, there were differences on the strategy, the timing, the execution of any military action.
Israel clearly felt an urgent need to act.
The report mentioned two options considered by the Israeli government.
Ground infiltration or direct airstrikes.
Right. Netanyahu apparently favored airstrikes, both incredibly high risk, obviously.
Huge potential for escalation into a wider regional war.
Absolutely. Ground infiltration is complex, dangerous. Airstrikes, even if successful initially, could trigger a massive Iranian response.
And the reason it didn't happen, according to the NYT, was Trump holding back approval.
Yes, despite his tough talk on Iran, the report suggests he saw the threat of an Israeli strike as leverage in his diplomatic efforts with Iran.
Interesting. Using the threat itself as a tool.
And apparently some within the U.S. government were in favor of the strike happening.
So differing views within the administration at the time.
It paints a complex picture. Trump's decision highlights his, let's say, unconventional approach, using the threat of force as a negotiating chip.
But he did still apply pressure, right? Past threats, deploying more military assets.
Oh, yes. Aircraft carriers, B-2 bombers.
Those stealth bombers.
Yeah.
Designed to hit buried bunkers like where some Iranian facilities are thought to be.
Exactly. It's all part of that corrosive diplomacy signaling capability and resolve, trying to deter Iran and push them towards negotiating on U.S. terms.
And finally on this, Netanyahu's stance remains unchanged.
Pretty much. Any acceptable deal, from his perspective, must involve total destruction of nuclear facilities with American oversight.
That's a maximalist position. Leaves very little room for compromise as things stand.
It reflects Israel's long-held view. Iran cannot be allowed the capability to build nuclear weapons. Deep skepticism about Iran's intentions.
Okay, let's pivot now to economics, a different kind of global interaction.
They're just as impactful.
The U.S. has announced new tariffs on some Chinese goods, and they could go as high as 245%.
That's the potential upper limit mentioned. These are very substantial hikes. Signals a real intensification of trade friction.
The reasons given are varied fentanyl trafficking, trade retaliation, general economic competition.
A multi-pronged justification, it seems, targeting various concerns.
Now, your source material had an expert suggesting China probably won't match that level of escalation, capping out maybe around 100%.
Yes, the thinking is they might opt for other measures instead, like restricting imports of, say, Boeing aircraft.
Hurting specific U.S. industries.
Exactly. The expert used an analogy to the Cold War arms race.
Right, that extreme tariff escalation can become mutually destructive, self-defeating.
So China might prefer more targeted non-tariff barriers. Strategic economic pain, perhaps, without totally collapsing trade.
And China reportedly has conditions for future talks.
They do. Things like mutual respect, consistent U.S. policy.
Stability.
Yes. And open talks on Taiwan, a huge issue for them, plus needing an authorized representative from Trump, laying down their expectations.
Okay, shifting to Europe now. The European Central Bank, the ECB, cut its key interest rate.
By 0.25 percentage points down to 2.25% annually.
And the aim is to stimulate the European economy, which is feeling the heat from these trade tensions and U.S. tariffs.
That's the rationale. Lowering borrowing costs to encourage investment, spending, give the economy a boost amidst growing uncertainty and risks.
And it seems there's pressure in the U.S., too, for the Federal Reserve to lower rates.
Yes, ironically, reportedly from Trump himself, despite his role in the tariffs causing some of the economic headwinds.
But Fed Chair Jerome Powell is resisting.
He is. He's warned about inflation risks and potential instability from Trump's policies, citing the Fed's independence and mandate.
So, a real point of tension there within U.S. economic policymaking.
Definitely. Short-term political pressure versus longer-term monetary policy considerations. Powell seems concerned about cutting rates prematurely.
Right. Okay, let's end on perhaps a more positive note. Developments in Africa.
Yes, some encouraging news from Senegal.
Reports of strong economic growth, particularly in the secondary sector. Industry, manufacturing.
That's right. A significant rise in industrial production, which is often a good sign.
Tends to create jobs, diversify the economy.
Exactly. Signals more value addition, maybe technological progress.
And the overall GDP growth is strong, 6.9% in 2024.
And importantly, it's been consistent in recent years, not just a one-off blip.
Driven by investments in infrastructure, industrial development, especially around Dakar.
That seems to be the case. Strategic investments underpinning sustainable growth. That can lead to real improvements in living standards.
There's a sense of optimism then about Senegal's progress.
Yes. Hope that it translates into more jobs, better incomes, improved quality of life.
And maybe inspires hope more broadly across the continent. It's good to highlight these positive trends, too.
Absolutely. It's a valuable example of potential growth driven by focused policy, a hopeful contrast to some other global trends.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, we've covered a lot of ground, The devastating war in Ukraine continues.
The volatile situation in the Middle East remains incredibly complex.
Significant shifts happening in global trade, potential escalations.
And yet also encouraging economic news from places like Senegal.
Our goal, as always, was just to give you a clearer picture, show how these seemingly separate events are actually quite interconnected.
Exactly. Seeing them together helps build a more complete understanding of the challenges and maybe the opportunities ahead.
Right. And with that, maybe a final thought for you, our listener, to chew on. Considering this whole intricate web conflict, diplomacy, economics, what single factor do you personally think will have the biggest impact on the global landscape in the coming months, and why?
A good question to ponder. We encourage you to keep exploring these connections yourself.